So there's a bunch of new movies opening this weekend. So you could choose between The Electric State, which is a big sci-fi spectacle from the guys that gave you Avengers Endgame, or you could pick something like Can I Get a Witness, which is a bit more soulful and homegrown. The group chat's here. We're gonna get through it all. Let's do this. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, so we got a lot to cover on today's episode, and I've got a film buff dream team here to get the job done. Teri, Hart, and Barry Hertz. I'm just gonna call y'all Harts. Welcome back to the show.
I love a good portmanteau.
the new duo. Okay, look, before we get to the movies being released now, I do want to look ahead at the horizon and something that's coming out later on. Barry, I'm going to start with you because you are one of the only people in the world to get to see the film adaptation of this.
May I please speak with the booking agent, the person who books shows at the Rivoli? We're a band. We're trying to get a show there.
Yeah, what band's that?
Nirvana, the band.
You gotta send me a photo of your band.
Okay, we will get it for you now.
That is a clip from Nirvana, the band, the show. It's a Canadian comedy TV series from 2017 that follows an indie band trying to book their first gig. And that show, it was co-created by Jay McCarroll and Matt Johnson. Matt Johnson being the star and director of Blackberry, which of course swept the Canadian Screen Awards last year. This week, Jay and Matt were at the South by Southwest Film Festival in Austin for the world premiere of Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie. And Barry, you were there too. I was experiencing severe FOMO watching your Instagram feed from that premiere. Talk to me. How did it go? And how did the people down south, receive what Jay and Matt had to offer?
I think it was, for me, personally, like a top 5 screening experience of my life.
Wow.
I've really never been in a room where they were locked in and on the same wavelength as the film from the opening second. Laughter regularly drowning out dialogue that preceded a scene, spontaneous applause, and like even before the end credits roll, like when people knew it was over, they just leapt to their feet. It was a rapturous reception.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's a very Toronto-centric story too, right? So so despite like that and this Toronto-centric story being shown in Austin, they were still like they were eating it up. Do you feel like they were missing parts of the culture?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, there were some Canadians in the room, like, Johnson and McCarroll brought 24 of their team members down for the festival premiere. And if you were a Canadian in Austin, otherwise like a filmmaker with another film or just like a distributor, producer, agent, whatever, you were at that screening. But at the same time, it was like a 400 plus auditorium and there were tons of locals down there. And they totally got it too. Either they were fans of the series from the get-go, so they knew like the kind of Toronto-ness of it. But I spoke with several members of the press who just kind of were there because it fit their schedule or because they were kind of curious, had not seen the series, had not seen Blackberry, and still were like, this was like a wild ride and I loved it.
Right. Well, and look, Teri, like you and I, of course, we did not get to have this experience, one of these top 5 lifetime experiences that Terry's talking about. But look, we of course are very aware of Matt Johnson's whole career as a filmmaker, but also as a rabble rouser within the Canadian film industry. So talk to me, what are you thinking in terms of his evolution as a filmmaker and potentially flag bearer for our national cinema?
Yeah, I mean, Matt's such an interesting guy to watch. Not only is he remarkably talented, but he certainly likes to stir the pot. I mean, he was very, very critical in very, very public ways, including an article in the Globe and Mail criticizing the entire system of funding and who gets to make movies. And then, God forbid, the kinds of movies that those artists make. He's been very public about the history of Canadian film and why it's problematic in his mind. And now he is a person working squarely in that system. Mm-hmm. Frankly, one of the people that he criticized most ended up producing Blackberry. So, I mean, he's kind of done a full circle from his criticism of it to then kind of being in bed with these same people that he criticized. So maybe he looked at it as like it being terrible at the beginning and then thinking, well, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it does work out. But what Matt's still doing is doing something a little bit different. The fact that he premiered this film at South by Southwest, the same strategy as him premiering Blackberry in Berlin, whereas most Canadian films and filmmakers are looking to make their world premiere, if not at the Toronto Film Festival, then at Cannes. So, I mean, I do think that Matt is always going to be an outlier. I think that Matt is always going to be looking at things with a critical eye and trying to figure out how he can change things up. And I think that's one of the reasons that he's such a great artist.
Right. Okay, well, look, like let's set Nirvana, the band, and Matt aside, because I do want to talk about another Canadian movie that is hitting theaters this weekend.
Just remember, Kia, we're doing the right thing here. We're helping the planet out.
Before the end-of-life policies were agreed upon, there were places in the world where people were poorer than others.
Human beings were killing each other for resources.
There is a reason we give our lives at 50. This can't happen again.
So that's a bit of the trailer for Can I Get a Witness? It's a new Canadian film from filmmaker Anne-Marie Fleming, stars Sandra Oh and Kira Jang. And it's imagining a future where the world is at peace, poverty has been eradicated, and climate change is no longer an issue. But to get there, society adopts this really unsettling policy where when people reach the age of 50, they're executed. And that's how they keep population under control. So, Teri, interesting premise. Do you think the film delivers on that premise?
I do. I thought that I was really struck by this movie. I think that the world that Anne-Marie Fleming has set up works really well. And it's one of those movies that you immediately want to talk about when you get out of it. The world she has set up is without flaws. I mean, the 3 points about why society has come to this place and what everybody or most people have bought into is a criticism of AI, a criticism of the healthcare system, and a criticism of the inequalities of the world. And so you have teenagers who are witnesses to these deaths when people turn 50. They're seemingly very peaceful deaths, and all technology is gone from the world. The standout for me, I mean, Sandra Oh is always spectacular. She's one of the most naturalistic and kind of empathetic actors, I think, working today. But the young girl, Kira, is spectacular. She's only been in this and another movie, I think, and she's really worth keeping an eye on. I think that she is great. And the film is also beautiful to look at. I mean, we're kind of in these, I mean, with today being an exception in Toronto, it's a bit sunny, but we're in these kind of gray days coming out of the winter. And Can I Get a Witness is set in like the late spring, early summerish time when everything is twinkly and beautiful. You can kind of smell summer throughout the movie. And I just think that it's doing what great sci-fi movies do, which is putting a premise out there that is a springboard for conversation. And Can I Get a Witness will definitely get you talking about what we do to keep people alive, why longevity of life is the holy grail to what we're all trying to accomplish, and maybe should we be looking at things a little bit differently?
Well, I mean, speaking of looking at things a little differently, I mean, you were mentioning the beauty of the movie, and of course, Anne-Marie Fleming often works in animation, and a lot of the times when in these scenes where they're helping people transcend or pass on, you get these beautiful animations kind of visualizing that transcendence. Barry, look, I mean, this is a movie that premiered at the Toronto Film Festival last fall, and I missed it at that time. It is opening wide in Canadian theaters today, but, you know, Teri mentioned Sandra Oh, you know, big star. Of course, I mean, when we talk about needing a Canadian star system to get people to come watch our movies, I mean, you don't get much more marquee than Sandra Oh. Do you think this film has a shot at connecting with a wider audience?
I mean, I'd like to hope so, but I'm going to play the pessimist here. It just, you know, it did premiere at TIFF, but it really was drowned out in the conversation there. I didn't, unfortunately, see. You know, as Teri says, you kind of walk out of it wanting to start a conversation, but I don't recall having many conversations about it with anybody. I did catch it there. You know, Sandra Oh, you know, also a kind of longtime collaborator with Anne-Marie Fleming, so it's nice to see that they're continuing the relationship. And Sandra is a performer who has achieved a lot of success stateside and makes a point of returning to Canada and working with Canadian filmmakers and friends and familiar faces. So that's always nice. It's, you know, we're talking about it now, which I think is an important thing. And I'd love to see audiences go out there and see it this weekend, as opposed to at least one of the other titles we'll probably be talking about in a moment.
Yeah.
But, you know, the marketing has been pretty lackluster. You know, unless you're really tuned in and you are like really listening intently now, you do not know that this film exists. And that is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, look, I mean, there's a niceness to this movie that I think everyone should definitely check out. And certainly we're talking about it now. And for more conversation, I mean, our friends at Q, they spoke with Sandra Oh about Can I Get a Witness? So you can hear that now on the Q podcast. And we're going to move along to the movie that Barry was just teasing there, the big one that's coming from Netflix. Take a listen.
We have a chance to tear their whole sick system down. Humans and bots fighting against the real enemy.
Oh, I like the way she thinks.
That's The Electric State, starring Chris Pratt and Millie Bobby Brown. And it's directed by the Russo brothers, who, of course, made some of the biggest films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. And look, like The Electric State reportedly cost $320 million to make, which makes it one of the most expensive movies of all time. Teri, you're already shaking your head at this. I mean, you've seen the movie. I guess it wasn't worth the price tag there?
No, I mean, what's worth that price tag? But this isn't. I mean, but as much as it's not worth the price tag, I'm telling you, I can hear the elevator pitch that made Netflix sign that blank check. It goes something like this. Here's what we're going to make. We're going to make Transformers meets E.T., and it's going to star the guy in Guardians of the Galaxy and the girl from Stranger Things, and it's going to be set in the 90s. Elevator doors open and they get a check for $320 million. I mean, that's the pitch, right? The problem is there's just no heart to this. I don't know why it's set in the 90s other than to have the soundtrack that it does and to have this kind of wink to Guardians of the Galaxy. Everything in this movie has that, a wink to something else. Mm-hmm. There's nothing, and it is based on a novel, but there's nothing that feels like is necessary to The Electric State. Even the title, I keep having to look, what's it called again? Because what are those three words and what does it have to do at all with the movie? 0.0. There is nothing that The Electric State has to do with. So, the movie is not good, and what breaks my heart is that there are going to be a bunch of kids that sit down in front of their televisions to watch this weekend, and families too. Also, parents, if you're worried about swearing, there's quite a lot of swearing in it. There's quite a lot of language in this, if that's a concern for parents. And they're going to think that this is how stories are told. And it's not how stories are told. It's not how stories need to be told. So if you are thinking to sit down as a family and watch a movie this weekend, don't let it be, what's it called again? The Electric State. Don't be wooed by the marquee names like Chris Pratt, like Millie Bobby Brown, like Stanley Tucci, like Coleman Domingo, like Jason Alexander in a ridiculous cameo. I mean, this is a movie that really wants to be all things Spielbergian, but ultimately, as I said, it really does have the soul of a robot.
Well, look, I mean, like, Teri, you're not the only one saying this stuff. In fact, there was like a Daily Beast reviewer who basically said this movie is like Spielberg throwing up on screen. And you know, I mean, this is a movie that is being annihilated by critics. I mean, we got like The Guardian calling it soulless digital content. And there's a writer at The Hollywood Reporter that called it the latest death blow to movies. Okay. And Barry, look, these reviews, I mean, they're not just saying this is a bad movie, right? They're basically saying like I feel like what they're saying is this represents everything that is wrong with the movie industry today. Are they just being dramatic, or is there actually some truth to this?
I think there's a little bit of hyperbole going on, because really, does it represent everything that's a threat to the movie system today? Not really, because this is never going to play movie theaters. Like, this kind of exists in its own siloed atmosphere. You know, we'll never know if it's really a disaster or a success because it's not putting numbers on the board. You know, Netflix does report viewership data, and it's done in kind of a really complicated way. You almost have to be like a kind of Talmudic scholar to figure it out. But, you know, does this represent the death of movies? No, I think it represents like a continued erosion of quality in the streaming space. But then again, like, Netflix isn't stupid. They know exactly what they're spending money on. They paid the Russos an exorbitant amount of money to make The Gray Man a few years ago, the Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans assassin versus assassin thing. And I guess that did well enough for them to cut a $300 million check for this time around. So if they want to do that, Godspeed. Doesn't mean I have to watch it. Doesn't mean that theaters have to put up with it. Is this going to draw attention away from like other, more quality releases that are going on in theaters this week? Yeah, for sure. Does this kind of like corrode the star system as we know it? Like Millie Bobby Brown is a very interesting case because we haven't really seen her outside of the Netflix ecosystem, right? She has the Enola Holmes movie. She has Stranger Things. She had Damsel, which was a Disney Plus thing. And, she had that one early role in one of the Godzilla movies that they were kind of, but, obviously you're not going to a Godzilla movie to see Millie Bobby Brown. Right. So like, is she a star? I have no idea. Chris Pratt also, like outside of the Guardian movies, most of his work has been in the streaming space as well. He had an Amazon Prime spy series. He had The Tomorrow War, which was another Prime film. And he has this. So it is kind of complicating our notion of not only what a movie is, but what a movie star is. Is that disastrous? Maybe. But for the moment being, it's kind of like isolated in that Netflix like playground.
Well, and I feel like, because it feels like there's a lot of hate directed at this movie, especially because of that $320 million price tag on a movie like this that people are calling a mess. But I feel like we should also add the caveat that's like, well, Netflix and streamers in general always pay a lot more than a studio would to make a movie because they're not going to end up paying residuals or back ends on theatrical box office. So the movies, like, that's why you end up getting $460 million for two Knives Out movies, right? So that is a caveat. But do you think that a lot of the hate is directed at, like, why are we spending so much money on this?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it's like, I don't know, I get it, but like, it's not your money. It's not taxpayer money. It's Netflix's money. They can spend it however they want. If they want to make absolute dreck and that dreck is shown to lure in subscribers, then more power to them, I guess. I guess the problem is like, and it's more maybe of a studio question, is like, is this movie being siphoned off from people who should be getting it? Right. Like, can we not give, 50 million to a Steven Soderbergh, for instance, for him to make something actually interesting versus 300 million to the Russos to throw at this sub-Spielbergian kind of.
But that's not how budgets work, and that's not how Hollywood works. It's not like, exactly. Oh, you know what? We'll just give. I mean, that's a romantic notion of, it's like, I'm not going to take my budget for food and put it into something else in my household budget. It's just not how it works. But I mean, I think that, yes, people are mad about the $320 million, but people don't talk about budgets when movies are good. People talk about budgets when movies are bad, and then they question the money. And I think that is one of the things, and it's particularly egregious here on both sides. It's an awful lot of money, and it's awfully bad.
Okay, amazing. So let's set the electric state aside now. I'm sure you guys have, I've already worked up your tempers as enough as it is. And if you're just joining us, you're listening to Commotion. My name's Rad Simonpillai, filling in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. I'm here in the group chat with Teri, Hart, and Barry Hertz, Hearts as we like to call them. And we're going to shift gears here to talk about something that happened 5 years ago. That's when the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic. So it's the anniversary of this moment that completely transformed our lives. And I want to take a few minutes to talk about how that moment in 2020 continues to impact our relationship with film and art to this day. So Teri, I mean, how would you say the pandemic affected your experience with films?
I would say that going down in history, if we look at the 21st century, I honestly think that this could be, outside of streaming, this could be one of the most significant shifts in how people view movies, like, since the creation of sound. Our entire relationship to the art form has changed because of the confluence of streaming and having movies in our homes that are so accessible, and the pandemic that made us go, oh, movies are anytime. Movies are not a special event. Movies aren't something I have to leave my house to do. And that means that we also behave differently, or many people behave differently around that art. That means that what our relationship is to a movie is different also when we're in the movie theater. We've seen a litany of articles about people's behavior in movie theaters being terrible, from having phones out to talking. I think that's a direct result of years of watching movies solely in our house and not being able to go to the movie theaters, and our behaviors changing around that.
Also recording the screens and throwing them online like that. You're seeing that in theaters too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the behaviors continue to blow my mind. I will say that this week I had an experience. I went to see Black Bag, which Barry referenced earlier, the new Steven Soderbergh, and it was the first time in a long time I've been in a movie theater that was that quiet. I mean, the entire audience was rapt with that movie. I don't know if it's the length. I don't know if it's the pace. I don't know if it's particularly that great for that audience. I can't. But it was remarkable. And both my husband and I did comment on it. But I do
let me set that up for a second, because Black Bag, Barry said, it's a Steven Soderbergh movie. It's like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but except if it was a sophisticated marriage drama. So incredible movie, and opening wide in theaters today. So yeah, I just wanted to set that up. Continue what you were saying there.
Yeah. So yeah, I just think that the pandemic, with regards to movie going, movie watching, and movies in our life, are inextricably linked and have changed our relationship to the art form forever in a way that kind of breaks my heart. But I am glad that people are watching more movies. I am glad that people are seemingly going back and watching other things, because technology also allows us to do that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, just to add on what you're saying there, because I mean, I feel like in the streaming era now we're having a lot of content that's made in a way like The Electric State for people to be watching while also scrolling their phones. Whereas you have something like Black Bag. If people are calling The Electric State everything that's wrong with the movie business today, then a movie like Black Bag, a spy thriller that's really intelligent and stuff, is kind of like, the fact that that's opening in theaters wide. Maybe that's kind of our hope for the movies. And I just want to bring Barry in here. Sorry, go ahead.
And throw in Can I Get a Witness there as well.
Yeah.
People have choices, make good ones.
Yeah. So Barry, I mean, so how are you feeling about our relationship to, movies in the pandemic era, but also like, having a movie like Black Bag in theaters in this moment where it feels like movies like that don't appear at theaters anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a lot of pressure on Black Bag to perform because, it could be taken as a litmus test for its studio focus features, which is a division of Universal. Like if this $50 million movie aimed at very discerning adult audiences doesn't perform theatrically this weekend, what kind of confidence is that going to set? What kind of precedent is that going to set for the next time a Soderbergh or somebody of his ilk wants like a mid-budget thing with stars, let's do something original? Are they going to get shut down and say, nah, that's kind of like a streaming affair, or we're not even going to fund that at all? So, that's dangerous. And I agree with pretty much everything that Teri said, in that the pandemic certainly significantly subverted audience behavior in so many ways. It was already on that kind of slope. Like, streaming was not new. Netflix was not invented in 2020. People were certainly glomming onto that and other streamers, but it was a real kick in the butt of audiences to kind of accelerate that trend of just staying home and consuming capital C content there. What I am curious about as well for the pandemic is just how much of an effect it will have on films themselves thematically. And I feel like it will be maybe a generation before we actually fully reckon with that in a cinematic storytelling way. Right now, I feel it's such a blip in terms of actual stories.
Not seeing movies actually address the pandemic in some ways.
Yeah, nobody wants to think about it. We would rather very much forget about it, memory hole it, and leave it forever. There were some attempts very early on during the pandemic heights to kind of make movies about the pandemic, and those have all disappeared. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to watch it, and I can't blame them.
Yeah. Okay,
not so exciting to make movies about people sitting in their houses, though.
Yeah. So look. So we got to leave it there. I mean, I feel like we could talk about this forever, but thank you both so much for being here and giving us some hope for the cinema.
Yay, us hope.
Teri Hart is an entertainment reporter for Super Channel, and Barry Hertz is the film and deputy arts editor at the Globe and Mail. They are both in Toronto. And that's it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of Commotion anytime, wherever you get your podcasts. So check us out on YouTube and Instagram. We're at Commotion CBC. I'm Rad Simonpillai, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Till next time.